Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Pasquantonio, and I'm education producer at the PBS NewsHour, and I run PBS NewsHour Extra, the student teacher resource website of the NewsHour, where you can get current events every day and find lesson plans and you name it. Well, one of the projects we did was a new website. We built a new website on the history of journalism, and we're going to show you that in a second. But first, I wanted to introduce you to our two guests, along with myself. We have Sid Golston and Liz Ramos. Let's take a look at the website, and we're going to show you a little video on that now.
Welcome to Journalism in Action, an interactive learning tool exploring journalism during key moments in American history. We built this learning tool to help middle and high school students examine the role of a free press and the meaning of journalism. Through fun, interactive activities, students will inquire, ask questions, and make their own judgments using primary sources in the form of newspaper articles, broadcast segments, political cartoons, and photographs curated from the rich databases of the Library of Congress. Journalism in Action is created by PBS NewsHour and developed by Da Vinci Interactive. The educational resource, written by 4 teachers, is part of the Teaching with Primary Sources Partner Program and is supported by a grant from the Library of Congress. Journalism in Action allows students to learn about 10 key moments in U.S. history through a journalist's lens. In this interactive website, students analyze journalism-based primary sources, exploring culture-shifting events affecting civic life. Let's look at the topics we cover: American Revolution, Early Republic, Civil War, Mental Health, Women's Suffrage, Muckrakers, Exploitation, American Immigration, World War II, Vietnam, Watergate, and Gender Equality. Students start by reading the historical context provided by introductions of each case study. These introductions offer background on the journalists themselves and insights into the news formats that existed at the time. Or they can simply head right to the interactive investigations. At the end of each case study is an outcomes section, which highlights public policy changes that came about as a result of civic engagement by everyday citizens. The section also discusses how many issues like civil rights, gender equality, and immigration policy are still being fought and covered by the press today. This website is meant to give students an understanding of how journalism evolved over time, including racial equality and diversity in journalism. We included journalists of different backgrounds, races, genders, and ethnicities, and yet we recognize that much room remains for the project to grow and feature new voices. We also include Educator Guides to help teachers quickly navigate the case studies and to find relevant standards, including ISTE standards. Each guide provides a summary of how that particular case study supports the understanding of journalism's role in American society, and in some cases, why we decided on a particular primary source. One of our main objectives is to provide tips for how you might include these case studies in your social studies, English, or journalism curricula. To use Journalism in Action for assessments, all of the primary source activities can be downloaded and emailed to you as the teacher, or uploaded to learning management systems to be shared with the whole class. Assessments might include the magnifier, annotation, and social media interactives, which require students to reflect on and analyze a variety of news sources. The final Create Your Own Story interactive allows students to write a short editorial on a topic of their choice. The standards guiding the project include Common Core, C3, and ISTE. Finally, we'd like to acknowledge our advisors at the Library of Congress, who provided critical feedback, helped us navigate the library's rich databases, and find primary sources which students would find eye-opening and intriguing. And of course, a large thank you to our 4 teacher curriculum writers. We hope you enjoy using Journalism in Action in your classroom.
So as you just saw, that's the Journalism in Action website in a nutshell. And yes, that video is geared a little bit more to teachers, but actually it kind of works for everyone. and it gives you a nice overview. But we really want to talk to you all today as journalism students and how you can use this website. So I'm going to get it up here now. You can sign in as a guest or you can log in, and that way you can send your teacher information or family and friends if you create some of these cool graphics and other neat things that you can create using the site. But this is the homepage that you saw on Journalism in Action, Civic Engagement, and Primary Sources through Key Moments in History. All of the sources, for almost all the sources, are coming from the Library of Congress, so they're primary source documents of the day. And well, what case study are you going to talk to us about today?
The women's suffrage unit.
All right, so let's click on that. And again, we'll just continue.
For women's suffrage. Well, I want to start by saying that as journalism students, you're probably aware of the importance of connecting history to what's happening every day. Anything you learn, even if it's about the Ming Dynasty, all the issues are ongoing and enduring. Who has power? Who doesn't? Who does the work here? How do they treat children or women? It's all sort of a seamless story. You may be wondering when you're watching the news today why Doris Kearns Goodwin is on all the time. She is connecting things that happened in the past history of the United States with what's happening now. And that's a special niche of this project, is to do that with you. This is very high content stuff. This is really investigative study for you in ways that you won't be doing in a normal history classroom. You won't be practicing this kind of research in other places. As you start off, you get some background that you might have seen, but probably not in as great depth. On this page, you see Frederick Douglass and Ida Wells Barnett. They are people that are featured in most textbooks. You will see something about these two, maybe not necessarily about their journalism. When you study Ida Wells Barnett, you hear very often about her anti-lynching campaign. But in this website, you're going to see that she owned a newspaper, which was, by the way, destroyed, and that she and her husband rebuilt a career as journalists. Ida Wells Barnett's newspaper was called the Broad Axe. And in the Broad Axe, she became a major suffragist. The Broad Axe was published throughout the country, and it had lots of stories about the suffrage movement. Ida Wells Barnett herself marched in the Great Suffrage Parade in Washington. In fact, she was told that Black suffragist women would march at the end of the parade, and she refused to do that. She joined the parade at the front. Okay, let's go on. Learn about some other suffragists. You have to go down.
Do you want me to go to the investigations now?
Well, we're going to do it page by page, but go ahead. That page I'm finished with, so we go to the next one.
Okay, great. We have Seneca Falls.
This part of the unit goes back to the early suffragists at Seneca Falls in 1848. And you see a very old newspaper, and they're hard to read, except you can use this magnifying tool and see the reporting of the Women's Rights Declaration at Seneca Falls, and you can read it pretty easily. This actually comes from Syracuse, New York in 1848. We'll go to the next page. We should include, there are questions on several of the images that you can answer, questions you're supposed to answer when you've read the document. Go to the next page.
And then this was Frederick Douglass's North Star.
Right.
I mean, he literally wrote about suffrage, and he was a former enslaved person, and there he is campaigning for women's right to vote. It's kind of amazing.
That's what we were saying, is you might know these people, but you aren't really aware of the power of them as journalists in the suffrage movement. Now, here's a Black ex-slave male who is a major leader in the suffrage movement. And in 1848, after the Seneca Falls Declaration, he had lots to say. Okay, so we can go on.
And I was just showing the annotation tool for if you're a journalist and you'd like to quote maybe from his article, you can use that annotation tool to save, and you can download it and save it, you know, for your journalism file.
Right, or for the some of the activities you'll be doing in this unit. Okay, so keep going down. There are other examples of journalism as a suffragist tool. Susan B. Anthony, who was probably the most famous feminist suffragist, knew how to use the newspapers in the state of New York to really publicize suffrage and her own role as the first woman who tried to vote in her local Rochester election. Now we're going to go down to a facet of suffragism that many may not know. It wasn't all that popular. There were many, many people who attacked the suffragists and their whole movement. This is a cartoon that we have to look at very carefully with our tool to answer the questions. One of the questions is, what are the men doing on the right here? Well, they're doing women's jobs. One of them has been grocery shopping, obviously. The other is holding his baby. And then on the left, we're supposed to look at the image of women. Well, we've got a woman police officer. We've got women who are speaking in public, which at the time was considered a very unlikely situation. And on the right, on the other side of her head, we see women who are demonstrating, which is definitely something that was not considered proper. Susan B. Anthony herself is wearing men's boots, and she's got a male hat on instead of a bonnet. She's wearing something that a man would wear. She's not wearing what most women were supposed to be wearing because you could see her legs. So there are a lot of things that you can do with a magnifier to understand a political cartoon. Okay, we go on to the next page. The role of newspapers when we did not have television or radio is very, very great. Many of the readership numbers would surprise you. The number of people that would be reading about the woman on the horse there is Inez Mulholland, who rode her horse through the United States, and in every town and area that she went through, her picture would be in the local newspaper. We don't think of newspapers today as being our main source of news. They were the only source of news until there was radio and television and social media and internet. This was the biggest way to get your message out. And the suffragists knew that, especially Susan B. Anthony was a really effective user of other people's newspapers. Okay, let's go to the next page.
Some of the subheadings too, you know, for students who include subheadings in their work, they can be just as interesting as the actual headline. Nation aroused by open insults to women. Cause wins popular sympathy. Congress orders investigation. Striking object lesson. So that actually backfired on the men, mostly all men, who put these women down for marching, and they threw things at them. It got pretty violent. It actually backfired, and it made the women's the parade even more favorable.
Right.
For the women.
Okay. Next. This is a Black women's sorority. And I've mentioned the Black women were supposed to march at the back of the parade. And the suffragist movement itself was segregated, which is not good news to hear, but it is the truth. And as the suffrage movement evolved, the National Women's Suffrage Association under Alice Paul did not recognize the role of Black women in the suffrage movement as well as it should have been done. These women, the fact that they even went to college is pretty amazing. The role of sorority among Black college women is enormous because it is such a difficult thing for them to have done. And, you know, there are questions there about this group of women. Let's go. There's a piece of the Broadax coming up, which is the newspaper that we described, Ida Wells Barnett and her husband. There it is. And we can use the annotation to look at the woman on the left. See, this is a very typical women's page, caring for your baby and what the latest fashion is. But the woman on the left, who's a typical housewife character, is a suffragist. And in the Broadax, Mrs. Frank M. Rosing, who is a Pennsylvania suffragist, gets a national audience. And that's why the Broadax, I think, was a very important thing, because local women looked for themselves to be represented in this national paper by this Black woman journalist. And you can see this is just a typical women's page. All right, here's a clock you want to buy. Here's a dress pattern you could get. But also, here's a woman working just like you to get the vote. These are all things that are in the Library of Congress, but they're not in your textbook, and they're not in most easy places to find them. Okay, let's go on. You're going to create your own social media post at the end. So as Liz is going to tell you, a lot of the new ways of learning involve, what are you going to do? You know, how is this going to affect what you can do? And one of the things, we're looking at several other women journalists, but your assignment is to create your own using material from what you've learned above and text from what you've seen above. But you can also research outside the limits of the unit, your own suffragist story in your state. And we're going to go look at the National Park Service happens to have a website for the 19th Amendment by state. We're going to look at Minnesota. By the way, it's organized by ratification, so it isn't alphabetical. And the Minnesota logo is at the beginning, and then you see connections to the people that already were in our unit. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony. But as you go down, right here, you're going to find Minnesota women that have not been researched nationally. The school board elections, a woman named Sarah Berger Stearns and another named Harriet Bishop, who founded the Minnesota Women's Suffrage Association in 1881. And in a woman named Dr. Martha Ripley is on the left there. And in each of these states, all you young journalists are from different states. In each state, you will see a mention of one or two or more women who were major suffragists in their own local towns and cities. And that's a place where you can do your own independent research. And when you create your magazine, you can include an article on Dr. Ripley or Mrs. Stearns or one of the local people. And that will be your contribution to the research we've led you through. You'll do your own. Just hoping that this particular story is very relevant because it's National Women's History Month. But then again, every month should be National Women's History Month. But when you do your magazine or newspaper, try to include some local research that you do yourself. As Liz describes the way that we teach history and journalism now, your own research and your own activism is very important. That's it.
Okay, thank you so much. And so we actually have Liz Ramos is going to take us on a deep dive with another case study. You want to take it away, Liz?
Okay, thank you, Vicki. Okay, here we have the Watergate case study, taking a look at the events that happened during the Nixon administration. And so here we have, just as Sid demonstrated to you, the introduction and investigation and outcome section. And so in this one, again, you'll be you'll be investigating primary sources of audio and video, as well as traditional primary sources here. So we're like bringing our case studies in with some of the modern technologies that are going to evolve with journalism, as Sid had mentioned. And the essential question in this investigation is, how did journalists provide the public with news about Watergate and congressional hearings on President Richard Nixon? And really taking a look at that investigative journalism that's a little bit more of what we think of today, with the media visual aspects that some of you may be used to. And so here we have an overview of what was the situation going on. Bernstein and Woodward, who are going to emerge as famous reporters, Pulitzer Prize winning journalists, for the reporting that they are going to do surrounding the event. And taking a look at what is going on with Nixon, the break-in, bringing in the Supreme Court, giving a little bit of that historical background and context surrounding their investigative journalism. And so it's going to be taking a look at how we see the role of journalism during this context with Watergate and what's going on, the book that's going to be published. Also, we're going to be taking a look at the diversity of that's going to be going on in journalistic newsrooms that are starting to change here at this point in time. We'll be taking a look at the news format. Watergate covered through video on the TV screens, the newspaper articles that are going to be continue to be written, and also the use of political cartoons as an important medium that communicated to people what was going on at this point in time. Okay, so that's just a bit of an overview of the different moments and topics within this case study that we have for you. So then we're going to go into investigating. Watergate begins. And so here students will have the opportunity to take a look at, answer the questions based on Woodward's notes on his conversation with Ken Dahlberg, a fundraiser for Nixon's re-election campaign. And then you also have a great interview from C-SPAN with Bob Woodward on how to treat sensitive sources and documents. And so especially for you journalists out there, learn from some of our experts here on the craft of your trade, and then also use this as you're watching the news today and see how you can see these ebb and flows and continuations of these great journalistic skills here. And so here you're going to be able to use a magnifying tool to bring about and see and go closer into looking at his notes. And then we're going to want you to take a deep dive and make some connections and practice those journalistic habits of minds that you guys are all developing and bringing into your craft. Then we have an image for you to take a look at and annotate. And again, it works just like the one that Sid showed you here, where you have an annotate mode where you can drag and then make comments based on what you're looking at with this notes. You can also click over here and switch it to if you want to magnify and see something a little bit clearer. Okay, so you're going to go through and take a look here at his notes based on his conversation with Deep Throat. And so you have the opportunity to take a look. And this is a nice way of going through these sources on how they're developing a story. So you are practicing those journalistic skills, taking a look at somebody else's notes here, but also going through how they do that investigative journalism and kind of like following in the footsteps of some of the greats that we've had. And so then we're going to come to the next. We're going to be going to the television series Firing Lane, moderated a conversation with William F. Buckley as a venue for discussion and debate on political, social, and ethical issues of the days. And so here we're going to have a clip featuring Woodward and Bernstein, which came out during the Senate hearings and 4 weeks before the smoking gun was released. And so here they're going to be talking about what's going on. So again, you're getting into the head of our journalists. You're getting into seeing the process and the craft, and hopefully learning some pointers and things that you can apply to your craft as a student journalist. And I'm assuming future Pulitzer Prize and award-winning journalists on different scales out here that we have joining us today. And so you'll take a look at this video, an older video of a investigative interview that we have. And then we know we still have these interviews going on today. So you can see how the past is connected to our future in journalism. And so we have some questions for you to think about. Why does he say his new book is a book about journalism and not Watergate? Why did Bernstein disagree with his description that journalist is different than a prosecutor or a judge in a courtroom? The Firing Line episode was called The Limits of Journalistic Investigation. Who gave the episode this title? How might investigative journalists push the limits of journalism? Why would people want to limit journalists? And the important part of journalists fighting back. Journalists have a job, investigative journalists, to go beyond the story and to think about the motives. Why would somebody want to try to stop an investigation? And might there be more to the story? And so that might provide even more impetus to go through, investigate, and continue on the hunt of the trail that you have there. So think about these things in the context of Watergate, but also stories that you may be investigating as young journalists starting out on your careers, and to continue to push forward and don't let a roadblock or obstacle stop you. Find ways around that to continue to get to the heart of the story, just like Woodward and Bernstein did. In what circumstances might you support reporters pushing ethical limits of journalism? Firing Lane provided a venue for discussion on political and social issues with experts of the day. How is it similar or different from news shows today? And then also think about the different avenues that have come up with the emergence of the internet and social media, and how it has continued, but it's also an evolving field. And what opportunities do you have out there with these new technologies to push your stories and to share your news as investigative journalists in this sphere of media today? Then we're going to be taking a look at the public media. And so a newcomer to the journalism landscape, public television aired live coverage of Watergate hearings and the rebroadcast later on at night. Jim Lehrer and Robert McNeil co-anchored hearings for PBS's NPACT. And so we know some of our current news stations are airing gavel to gavel coverage. We still have C-SPAN where you can go and find it. PBS NewsHour, some of your cable network news organizations. And then if you happen to have a parent or some of you who may have some daytime recording shows while you're in school, sometimes those shows are getting interrupted by our network news going to some of that gavel to gavel coverage with some of our modern investigations. And so we see how this is still something that we're seeing in media today, in news today. So then we have here media literacy and civic engagement. So here we have PBS's Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer discuss their coverage of Watergate 40 years after the fact. And then you'll watch this video, and then what surprised you about this look back, the reflection. Why would Nixon want to limit the public's ability to report the news? And again, pushing through those boundaries. What video production techniques, lighting, camera angle were similar and different between PBS's cover of Watergate and the NewsHour interview in 2013? And then how have we continued that on with how we're reporting and using media today? Think about how many of you have a ring light and different things that we're using when you're looking at the lighting, camera angle, and all of that in contemporary situations. What questions would you have asked? Let's put you in the driver's seat of being the journalist. What are you curious about? What would you wanted to have known? And so that's going to continue us on to our next part, where we're looking at the Senate hearings, going through, looking at those political cartoons that I had mentioned that were an important part of the story, and drawings. And so with political cartoons and political imagery, it's our traditional cartoons, but also the sketches that some of our journalists, our journalists who will use imagery capture. Those of you that may be covering an important issue that is going on in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, you can't have cameras or in the courtroom. And so you'll see sketches, and sometimes those will go viral and be amplified to see the positions and the reactions of what's going on in the courtroom, where we don't have any imagery to help bring that story to life and communicate what's going on to the American public at large. And so here we're going to have you take a look at a political cartoon, take a look at the different sections of a political cartoon. And this is going deep, just like we had you take a look at the deep dive and critically amplify what's going on in the notes of Woodward and Bernstein. Take a look closely at political cartoons. And this is something that you can think of in your own practice, is to take a political cartoon and put it into quadrants and take a close look at it and examine what's going on. Because our eye, when we're looking big picture, may miss some of the intentionality that a political cartoonist puts in there that's important to help tell the story. Okay, so here we have part of a cropped image. What do you see going on? And then you can take a look to the next part and really focusing in and narrowing in what's going on in the image. And then diversity, the need for diversity in the media. It used to be kind of like the good old boys club going on, and we see things shaking up here at the time of the Watergate. Here we have Helen Thomas, who was the first female White House correspondent, and she's breaking barriers. Some notable women and reporters of color who covered Watergate include Connie Chung, who became the first Asian American woman to anchor a national broadcast evening news. And so we're also starting to see at this point in time diversity happening to our newsrooms in terms of women and people of color, our BIPOC journalists coming in here. And while we saw ground being broken, we also know we still have work to do today. And so continue to be those trailblazers. Those of you that are out there who are female, BIPOC, LGBTQ, we need your voices out there, and continue on and bring those different stories and angles of a story and framing of a story that are much needed in our society to help us broaden our awareness and perspectives, and helping us to push for more social justice in our world today. And so here you're going to be taking a look at Helen Thomas. Take a look at her in a video interview she did in 1999, in which she discusses reporting on Watergate for the United Press International and covering 10 presidents over the course of her amazing career, getting in there in the press room, asking questions, and holding our executive administrations accountable. And go back and watch some of her questions in the press room. She is amazing. And so we have you take a look at this. What sense do you get about being a journalist from listening to her? What evidence do you see that Thomas brought real objectivity to her work? At the beginning, she says, I've been really lucky to watch history pretty much up close and to see the highs and lows of every president I've covered. Why do you think there are specific journalists assigned to the White House? Every American is affected by all the things that happen in the White House in one way or another, said Thomas. How might Watergate have affected civic participation on part of the public? And again, how does what we see our news journalists covering the White House affect our civic participation today? Think about these things. How can you use your work to help inspire civic participation today? And so now we're going to have you kind of put you in the journalism seat, and you're going to create your own social media post. Every major news organization has reporters and has a social media arm to it. It's an important part of how we're getting our coverage today. And so here we want you to choose an image from the carousel, and we want you to be the editor, to be the creator. Your editor has just assigned you to create a news post that highlights coverage of the Watergate era. You may choose to write your own post about investigative coverage of Woodward and Bernstein, the Senate hearings, the protest over Nixon's resignation, or another aspect, as long as it involves how journalists reported on Watergate. And so here we have a place where you're going to be able to select your image. So as Sid showed you, we have pre-selected images that you can select that might go with the angle that you're coming to. You're going to select that image. And then we have where you're going to write your post. And then think about what would be some possible comments. What do you think the public and people out there might have to say on your post? And be thinking about how you're going to be sparking that conversation to continue the awareness going on. And then you're going to create your post here. And then lastly, so we can extend it, we have, how did journalists provide the public with news about Watergate and Congress investigation into Nixon's role? While Nixon was never impeached, he resigned. And so we have here where we have some images and outcomes about investigative journalism at the time. How did it impact public's trust in the media? Again, the images and the continuity and change we see going on. News coverage of impeachment hearings in 1998 and 2019. The 1998 impeachment of President Clinton, the impeachment of Donald Trump, and Watergate inevitably resurfaced in the news. And so here's where you can bring it to that continuity and change on the national level. But then you can also think about what else is going on with investigative journalism with our executive branches at the state level as well, and to tell the story. And so we have an activity where you get to be the story about what's something going on in the world today and putting you in the driver's seat.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for those of you, I do edit the Student Voice blog for PBS NewsHour Extra. I would love it if you pitched me story ideas. It could perhaps be a post that you've already written for your school newspaper that could work great as a cross post, or if you have an original idea, or maybe something based on the Journalism in Action website that could be published. Oh, we'd love that. And so I'll include the contact information in this email, in this presentation. And just to say thank you once again, and we hope that you check out the Journalism in Action site, and that we get your feedback on it.